Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Hartsfield. I am Disability Inclusion Lead Consultant with Starkloff Disability Institute. And we're happy to have you for the first ever webinar in this, like this, Success at Work with a Mobility Disability. I'm personally very excited about this. We've got some great panelists for us to talk to today. Before we begin, if you need it, we do have closed captions on. You can access it by going down to the bottom of your screen. There is a closed captions feature. You can either have the transcript up or you can have the individual captions at the bottom. We also have a Q&A feature that we'll be using. My colleague Katie Fields is in the background keeping an eye on that. We do plan on having time at the end for Q&A, but if you have a question throughout, go ahead and feel free to post it in the Q&A feature so that we can answer it. We are recording this, as you heard. We'll be hosting it on the Starkloff YouTube channel. We just asked for some time to get the captions uploaded so that we can have good quality. So a little about Starkloff Disability Institute. We are a St. Louis-based nonprofit. We seek to build inclusion where we live, learn, work, and play through disability-led programs that advance economic opportunities and transform lives. Joining us today are Starkloff's Chief Financial Officer, Brian Chow, and a distinguished member of our board of directors, Christopher Gaines. Brian has a master's in business administration, and prior to joining Starkloff as our CFO, he was also a board member and worked at Enterprise Bank and Trust. Brian was recognized by the St. Louis Business Journal as one of St. Louis 30 under 30 in 2019 for the work he's been doing here. Thanks for joining us, Brian. Christopher Gaines, as I said, is a Starkloff board member, and alongside Brian and myself, a graduate of the Starkloff Career Academy. Christopher has a master's in management and has experience as a human factor engineer, technical writer, and program manager. He is also a 2018 recipient of the Emerging Leader Award for the National Society of Leadership and Success. I hope I got that all correct. Welcome, Christopher.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
So what's special about this webinar and why we're very excited is we're doing this in partnership with two amazing organizations, Paraquad and the United Spinal Association. Paraquad is another St. Louis-based nonprofit. It's one of the first 10 federally funded centers for independent living in the United States. Paraquad was founded by Max and Colleen Starkloff. That name should sound familiar. Paraquad champions equity and independence for people with disabilities through services, partnership, education, and advocacy. From Paraquad, we're joined by the president, Amy Waymeyer. Amy has a master's in business administration and over 15 years of leadership experience in both the for-profit and nonprofit sector. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you very much, Jason. I'm happy to be here.
And finally, joining us last but not least, definitely, the United Spinal Association is our other partner. They are an Atlanta-based organization that seeks to empower and advocate for people with spinal cord injuries and disorders and all wheelchair users to achieve their highest quality of life. We're joined by the president and CEO, Vincenzo Piscopo. Vincenzo has a master's in business administration, marketing, and finance, and a master's in leadership and creativity. Prior to joining United Spinal, Vincenzo had over 25 years of experience working a variety of roles in Coca-Cola. So welcome, Vincenzo. Great to have you back.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we've got a talented group of individuals here, all with different levels of mobility impairment, wheelchair users, all of that, and or mobility disability, sorry. So I'm really excited about this talk. We're going to start with Brian. Brian, the Americans with Disabilities Act protects people with disabilities from discrimination and requires employers provide reasonable workplace accommodations. How have you requested accommodations in the past? And what advice would you give to someone requesting an accommodation for the first time?
Excellent question, Jason. And it's certainly something that has evolved over the course of my lifetime as a job seeker. I've always been a strong advocate, having been born with a form of muscular dystrophy and using a wheelchair most of my life. Had a family that, strongly supported me in advocating for myself. So asking for accommodations and everything is never been something that I've strayed from, whether that was, in elementary or middle school, up all in the way of my career. But it's definitely been a journey. I think, like a lot of us, sometimes we try to minimize the accommodations that we may need because we don't want to seem like, it's going to cause a lot of trouble. Anything like that, we just want to make it easy as possible. And so certainly earlier on in, my job seeking days, seeking internships in college or summer jobs or anything like that, I probably asked for kind of the bare minimum things that would, make it maybe just possible for me to make my way. But as I was finishing graduate school is when I also went through the Career Academy at Starkloff Disability Institute, and really became confident as a person who was disabled entering his profession, and learned about how to talk about my disabilities with employers, my rights under the ADA, and what a benefit that it could be to just generally get those things out of the way. So as I got my first job at Enterprise Bank and Trust, I had a really good conversation with the HR team there, as well as my hiring manager, who I'd be reporting to when I started there, about making sure that I had an environment that I could work in that would allow me to succeed well in the career. And so they were a terrific employer in that they really went above board and doing things as simple as making sure that I had a lightweight laptop that I could more easily take around the office for meetings and everything like that, to doing more significant things like installing automatic doors where they hadn't been, even not just on the main entry, but at multiple points from the non-secure and secure parts of the office, in multiple of the restrooms, and doing things like giving me a key remote that I could just click a button and it would open. And so they were really terrific in doing those things. And that was probably the most expensive accommodation that they had to provide or were able to provide. But so many of those things, as a lot of people in the industry know, accommodations can be really cheap. It's adjusting a desk so it's at an acceptable height that's more accessible, providing a little bit more of a flexible schedule. And so going through that whole process, I've just kind of learned to have a very candid conversation with employers. And I find that it's difficult to do sometimes off the bat. It can be uncomfortable, but it is provided me with the best results to end up in a workplace where I can succeed. And I guess really that is the one main place that I've had major accommodations, and a place that maybe hasn't provided disability accommodations on a regular basis. My next job was working at Starkloff Disability Institute, first as business manager and now as CFO. And it was not hard to explain, disabilities or the various accommodations that would be needed in that workplace, just because, about 80% of our staff or more have some form of disability, whether it be mobility or hearing or visual or non-visible disability. So that was a much more simple process. And it's been interesting now on the other end, kind of in addition to my role as, CFO and handling the finances of the organization, I also manage kind of the HR and facilities. So I am now responsible for helping make sure that any employees we hire have the accommodations they need to succeed in the workplace. And so one of the things that I try to do is be very candid from the point of posting jobs and making sure that on our job listings there are statements, just like how would you contact the recruiter if you wanted to apply. There's also a statement that says if you need, a form of communication like ASL interpreters or something else to, make this a successful experience for you, please contact, this email address or this phone number, offering multiple forms of communication. And then also just being very candid in the onboarding process, job offering process, about if people need accommodations, just ask. And we have a form and a process to kind of go through that. And it's served us very well, I think. So.
Thank you. Do you have, if someone's going to request an accommodation, are there things that you recommend they have ready for that conversation?
I think it's good to know what you need to be successful and just kind of the general, job and everything. I think it's good to have a very strong understanding of what the job is, your abilities, and, some things that, if there's a disconnect, what exactly may help you perform those as best as you can. And I don't think you should shy away from asking for help, figuring out what those accommodations may be if you don't know necessarily what it is. But it's always helpful to have a couple of different options that would work, and just, show that you are a problem solver, like most people with disabilities are. It's a valuable skill set.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Brian. Next question is for Christopher. Communication and self-advocacy skills are especially important, as Brian showed, for people with mobility disabilities. What are the most important communication skills you use as a person with a disability? And what advice would you give someone who wants to develop their self-advocacy skills and become stronger communicators?
Okay, that's a long one. So, first of all, I'll tackle what are the most important communication skills. I'd argue that for the most part, they're the same as for an able-bodied person. They don't change just because I have a disability for the most part. What changes is when and how to advocate for specific needs that I have because of my disability. I'd also suggest that people assume positive intent, assume the outside party is ignorant and not willfully malicious or neglectful of you. Often people just don't understand how emotional of an experience it can be to address certain disability challenges when the world isn't built for you or your needs aren't being met and it's affecting your ability to execute on whatever it is that your job is. Or even in your personal life, if people don't understand how something's affecting you, they can't help you and they can't be your advocate or your ally. People don't just wake up every day choosing to be ableist for the most part. So I would say don't lead with anger or passivity, because this might make new issues that weren't there or exacerbate the existing ones. Express yourself clearly, and this ties to practicing, taking time to think about your thoughts and feelings and how you would convey them to another person. So if you're trying to explain mobility issues to someone who's never had to face similar issues, just think about what key details would you want them to take away from that discussion to understand what it's like in your shoes. As far as developing your skills, again, practice. It's one of the best things you can do for yourself, is to pretend that you're speaking about your disability either in the mirror or to someone you trust and get feedback from them. Request them to listen first before they offer you advice. And doing this will help it feel more comfortable when you're trying to be assertive. You won't be as nervous in the moment about talking about such sensitive topics because you've already done it before. Practicing active listening, learning to listen well and repeat others' key messages will go a long way toward recognizing where you can help yourself and improve your own messaging. And I think that lastly, you can also practice by advocating for others. If you see someone in need, try to get an understanding about what they're going through and turn that sympathy or that empathy back on yourself and try to think about what you would say if you were speaking up for a friend versus when you're so close to it, maybe you can't see some of the areas where you could do better.
It sounds like self-confidence is really a key component of this too. Would you say that's correct?
Oh, definitely, and I think that ties back to the practice and getting feedback from others, because the more that you're comfortable with the subject matter and with how you tackle the potential pushbacks you might get from people or clarifications, then you'll be even more confident about how it is that you're presenting yourself and explaining your needs, because you've already gone through it before.
For those who have kind of had negative experiences in the past, um, do you have any recommendations for how to navigate that, or at least keep that from like having a really negative impact on your confidence and the way you communicate with others? I know that's a tougher question.
I can answer that first. I think when you encounter situations like that, if it's possible to have like a third party mediate to help them understand your side, that might help. But also, if that's not possible, maybe going back and finding where the disconnect was, like what caused the rift, or are they even aware that they upset you, or that they got something wrong, or did you do something to upset them? And then try to explain, um, this is what I was experiencing that caused me to do this, and therefore I need this from you, or I would like you to do this. So that way they can see your side and they don't think you're just being, I don't know, uptight or too needy or whatever it is they might think because they don't understand your point of view. Um, and even ask them, what would you suggest to resolve this? Maybe they have another idea that you hadn't thought of, and making them part of the process can feel less like an attack and more like you're trying to work with them.
I appreciate that. I especially relate to your statement about assuming positive intention from everyone. Yeah, I don't believe anyone wakes up and looks in the mirror and says, I'm going to be ableist today. But there's a lot of kind of deprogram we all have to do, whether we're disabled or not, and of process the complex way that our environment influences the way we think about disability. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next question is for Amy, and I think this is definitely related. So, Amy, the first thing most people are going to notice about this group of folks is that you have a disability. I know that three of you use a wheelchair. And we had a great conversation prior about how you manage that. So can you talk about how you manage the awkwardness or maybe inappropriate behaviors that come from people really just seeing your wheelchair? And like, what advice would you give to people who worry about discrimination because of how visible their disability is?
Sure. Thank you, Jason. And it's funny because I really think that Christopher and I share a lot of the same views. So I really try to start um, with a lot of grace and acknowledgement that this may be new for people in the workspace. And I'm thinking particularly, much like Brian, I have worked both in non-for-profit and at the university where disability was pretty typical. And so there wasn't as much discomfort or sort of lack of understanding. But I spent 10 years in a for-profit Fortune 500 company where I was the first person that at least I could see that had a visible disability. And so from that perspective, it was different. I learned that in order for me to be successful, I had to take a lot of first steps. So first step to smile, first step to say hello, first step even to reach out my hand for the people who don't know how to approach me. And I think oftentimes just the ability to ease that comfort. And I think probably most of the people on this webinar recognize that it's really no different than approaching any person. But sometimes people are so afraid of offending or doing something wrong that they're afraid just to approach and to start a conversation. So I think those are sort of my first encounters. As I think about the hiring process or moving up, I had some pretty interesting experiences, and some were difficult. I had a hiring manager who shared really what was probably a harsh reality and difficult to hear. And so whether people do this consciously or unconsciously, he said, when you enter the room, the only thing that people notice is your wheelchair. And I was like, wow, and so I happen to think I'm quite talented and have a big personality. So I'll believe that it's maybe not the only thing, but I will say it is an important thing and it's a big thing. And so I have learned that when I enter each interview really prepared. I recognize that it's important to exude confidence and in many ways, maybe overconfidence, and to the best of my ability, outperform my competition in order to be considered. And I think that is, that is a challenge because I try to anticipate, what are the potential missed or the concerns that the hiring team might have about people with disabilities. And I'm really creative in my examples to demonstrate how I successfully did the thing that I know they think I can't do. And that's a bit manipulative, but it is also true stories of things that I've been successful doing. Once on the job, I found I had the most success. And this is probably true for a person without a disability as well, but just getting to know people and building relationships. And then most importantly, just doing my job well. Most people appreciate coworkers who are friendly, who are kind, who do their work and do it effectively. And I think the same is very true for managers. For me, like staying very positive and joyful, while maybe seem cliche, but that has worked for me. And I think it's challenging because we all desire equity and we shouldn't have to be required to do extra things to be successful. But I think if you look at the statistics and you see the number of people with disabilities in the workforce, it's really small.
Mhm.
And so there isn't as much experience for employers to know how to interact and to have the experience of working with people with disabilities to do it well. And so I have found by making my boss's life easier, by staying positive, by offering solutions and not a lot of challenges without solutions, and then also offering to help when opportunities arise, have led to really positive experiences for me. And I did have the bosses, I laugh, shared this example with Jason previously of a boss used to say to me, I would hire 100 people with disabilities if they were just like you. The reality of that is a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure to feel like you are representing the success of every future person with a disability in that job. And then I think the flip to that is sometimes if there is a struggle or something goes wrong, and this is true of any other, this could be race, this could be gender, this could be lots of things, but sometimes you fear that that's going to be attributed to your disability and not just the normal process of being an imperfect human. So in some ways, I will say that I worked in an ableist work environment, but I learned to adapt to that and hopefully, continue to be by building those relationships and by educating, just by building those relationships, helping to contribute to making that a little less. That's my example.
Thank you. So the first thing I think of, because my background is in social work, so I'm always thinking about the psychology of things. You talk about a lot of pressure and a lot of performance and needing to really push and always have a positive attitude. There's a lot of there's a lot of energy that has to get devoted to that. What have you done to kind of maintain a positive psychology, so like keep yourself going in the face of all of that? What helped you?
I think for me, just generally speaking, and this is very different for very different people. People give me energy, so when I am around people who I enjoy being with, if I am doing work that I am passionate about, and if I am building relationships and caring for my job and the people around me, then that becomes much easier for me. I think that avoiding negativity, and I think as I've gotten older, also learning to um, just set some boundaries around my time, so that I also have time to have fun. When I was a bit younger, it took a lot to be a successful person with a disability. So I devoted most of my time and effort in my career. As I've gotten older, I think that it's important, to your point, Jason, to keep those balances of having both a social life and time for yourself so that you can be your best person, for your workplace and for ultimately the people that you're interacting with and um, who you depend on to be successful for the mission of your organization.
I appreciate that. You saying that. It reminds me of a psychology professor I had who said, we are balloons constantly filling up with pressure. If we don't let it out, if we don't vent some gas, we're gonna pop. And it'll be very public and it will be very damaging. And so finding that way to let off some of that steam is especially important for, like you said, for people with disabilities, especially if you're the first person in your environment. So thank you so much for answering that question for us.
Thank you.
Vincenzo, you acquired your disability later in your career. I'm curious to know what that transition was like for you, and what do you know now that you wish you had known back then?
Thank you, Jason, for that question. So the transition for me, it was not difficult, right? And I think in my case, I was 40 or 42, 43 years old when I became a paraplegic. And, so I had, as a person, a certain level of maturity. I had, a job that I already was, respected and people knew what my worth was and all that. And I had a lot of support from my family, from work and all that, that made the transition easier, right? Obviously, there is a lot of things when you acquire a disability like a spinal cord injury that really you have to get used to, that you have to relearn and all that, that are a little bit frustrating. But I think the fact that I acquired it as an adult with a level of maturity allowed me to face those kind of challenges with a level of maturity that made it easier. Now, as for it relates my transition to work, I was very fortunate to work for a company. I was working at Coca-Cola at that time. I was working for a big company, right? A company that knew very well what they're doing and what to do to support me. And they did a very good job. They did a very good job to ensuring that I had everything that I needed to be able to be successful. And they actually made it easy for me because I did not have to ask necessarily. They just gave it to me. And so that was, that made things very, very easy for me. And also because I had been in that organization for so long, I had worked for Coke already for like 12, 13 years when that happened. I had a lot of friends, a lot of people that knew me and all that stuff that were very genuinely supportive. and gave me all the support that I needed when I went back to work and all that stuff, that I never felt any kind of ableism or discrimination or anything abruptly, right? Here and there you would feel it. Now in retrospective, I think about things that they told me. I think, that's very ableist. But the thing for me is that disability was completely new. It was, I had not had any kind of experience with anybody with a disability before I became disabled. So everything for me was new. So I was, at the beginning, I was embracing the inspiration porn and all those kind of things that people with disability face when we have a disability. What I would do differently, though, that what I wish I knew is that, I felt extremely grateful for Coca-Cola, right? For everything that they were giving it to me. Because I thought that they were really going the extra mile. When in reality, they were not going the extra mile. They were doing what they were supposed to do. But if I had known that, I would have been more self-reflective on what is it that I really need to be able to add more value to the organization. What were those kind of accommodations that would have made my life easier? Because since I was so new with my experience with disability, I was very afraid to ask. And I was just thank you, thank you, thank you for whatever they were giving me. And because of that, I was not as assertive as I should have been in other circumstances. Like, for example, there were opportunities where, I was, they had like all staff meetings in offsite places, and they hire an odd boss that didn't have a lift, right? So, because like everybody with a disability, we problem solve, that didn't stop me from, from going, but I was not assertive enough to make sure that that boss needs to have a lift for me because I need to participate as everybody else. So
knowing that what Coca-Cola was doing for you wasn't a nice thing, it was a legally required thing.
right.
I I'm really getting a sense from all four of you. There's this theme of self-advocacy and knowing what your rights are and understanding that. Can you really quick, I'm going to use the word inspiration exploitation. Can you define that for us real quick, just in case anyone in the audience has not heard that term before?
Me?
Yes, please.
Yes. So I mean, is the inspiration? You used a more politically correct word. I'm used to call it, what I called it. But
Right.
anyway, that is like when people get inspired by seeing you do things that are not, that are regular things that people do, right? For example, I go to the supermarket and I'm shopping, oh my God, you're such an inspiration. So what do you mean that I'm such an inspiration? Because I'm here buying tomatoes, and the reason why they feel it's an inspiration is because there is some anchored, rooted ableism that assumes that people with disability are not able to go out. So the core of that inspiration issue is not the fact that you're inspired, is why you're inspired by seeing somebody doing things that are regular. And you're inspired because you assume that people with disability are less than, and therefore they shouldn't, the fact that you go and buy tomatoes is wow, it's such an inspiration, right? So that's more or less that. And, it's telling you, it's feeling inspired because, like, I hear that all the time, oh my God, you're such an inspiration because you play tennis. I'm the least inspiration as a tennis player because I suck as a tennis player. So don't tell me inspiration. I mean, there's many, many other people you can inspired about, not me playing tennis, So, but the fact that, oh my God, he's playing tennis, it's because they're assuming that they're not people that play tennis, out there on a wheelchair.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think there's a fine line between being inspired because you're doing something inspiring. Like, we know a gentleman who, he acquired a mobility impairment, spinal cord injury, and he goes and uses that to like as a story for inner city youth of like, this is how you should avoid, this is what happens if you don't avoid gang violence. But Stella Young like to say like, people saying we're inspiring because you get up in every day and you remember your own name. Um, has any one of our other panels, have you had any experience with that, with being called you're inspiring because you're just doing an everyday thing?
Please let me go next. I just
Okay.
encountered this like literally less than a week ago. And I was in a weird way kind of excited because I was like, oh my god, it happened, the thing. So like I was my current role, I'm a human factors engineer, and on my team we run a lot of workshops for design thinking and redesigning processes and improving them. And one of the workshop attendees came up to me during one of the breaks, and he said, "Oh, I noticed you have like some type of mobility issue. Like my grandma had scoliosis," and asked me like, did I have a similar thing going on? And I explained what I was comfortable with explaining about my condition, but tried to stay focused on what I was there for. And then he goes, "Oh yeah, you're such an inspiration." And I'm like, "Oh my god, he did the thing!" And it was weird because I always see like the stories of that, and I've had people say it to me before, but not so recently. So to have that happen, I immediately thought back to the stuff that we discussed in like the Career Academy and other things, and how you're supposed to respond. And I said, well, I'm just doing what anyone else would do in my position. I'm doing my job. And nothing's different about what I'm doing than what someone without a disability would do. And kind of shut that down. But it was just interesting that even while I'm there performing, in my opinion, firing on all cylinders, doing everything we're supposed to be doing, working with the team, that's still all that someone can see. And I guess it just strikes me how a lot of times, like Amy was saying, even when we're performing excellently, we're doing everything right, and maybe and then some, people still boil us down to the visuals of what they see in our bodies. And I don't understand that because I guess I've never felt like I was limited to what my condition says about me. And I would encourage everyone else not to feel that either. And maybe it'll take a few times for people to start to see that you're just like anyone else without a disability. But whatever it takes to show that you can do the job, even if you have to keep showing them until they finally get it, I would encourage you to do that because it's still happening in me, and I've been doing this for years now. So I hope that helps some people.
That is a something I've encountered my entire life too. And whenever it's the inspirational comment or some cute comment of like, whoa, you're really zooming down this hallway or something like that in your wheelchair, it's a constant battle of, do you just let the comment go and get on with your day because you just want to do what you need to do, or do you use this as a teaching experience for that person so that you don't encourage so many in the future, and knowing that they're not saying that out of anything malicious in their heart. And it's a constant battle of, you don't want to make them feel embarrassed, but use it as a teaching experience and improve things for the future. And I often think, is it really my responsibility to take some time to teach somebody something right now? Because you run into these situations, the inspirational comments or the zoomy comments all the time, at least in my experience. Maybe I need to go slower down the hallways. I don't know.
No, I agree with you. And this was literally less than a week ago. It was last week we did a 3-day workshop, and in the middle of one of the days I was tired. We'd been there for 3 days. It was start to end of the day, all day in that workshop, with occasional breaks here and there. But we were all physically and mentally tired. But I said, well, what would I say if someone came to me and told me this story? Would I want them to have said they just stood there and took it and let it go, or would I want to like be the example and like say that this is what you should do to stop this from happening again? And even though I was tired, I was like, I can drum up the energy to give like 2 sentences in rejection of this portrayal of me. And maybe the next time I'll let it go and but at least every other time I want to at least try to do something so I can say that I'm pushing back, because the more that I let that happen, eventually it'll become a pattern, and I'm really bad about once I start something, I can't switch to something else. So I tried to at least put my best foot forward then and just show that this is how you're supposed to handle it. But who knows, maybe next time I won't be in the mood to be the shining beacon, but at that moment I was like, I want to do it, so it's up to the person.
Amy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I just wondered if anyone's been patted on the head before. That's my favorite. So yeah, no, I mean, everyone thinks I'm as, inspiring for whatever reason. And then anyone who's ever dated me in my life or who I'm now married to is a wonderful person, as well. And so that is something too. And by the way, Phil is a wonderful person. However, I like to think that, I'm quite a catch too. And so
Right,
those
right.
are some of the things that just make me crazy. So thank you.
If you're I really love what Christopher said about how you kind of need to get to it early. You need to nip it in the bud early, because if it becomes a pattern, then um all of a sudden you change and everyone's like, but I'm confused. I've been praising you for existing for years now, and all of a sudden you're not happy with it. What's wrong with you? So it's embarrassing for them, but it's really better for you in the long term if you get to it early. Would you say that that's correct?
I would. The only time I prefer to be praised for existing is monetarily for my manager through a raise. But other than that, I don't need it.
I love that.
Yeah. That's a good transition to our next question. I think we're making great time. I want to open up this one to everyone. So, you've all had leadership experiences. You've all been in for-profit and non-for-profit. Some of you are still in for-profit. Um, what advice would you give to someone with a mobility disability who wants to pursue that leadership career, who wants to be in a leadership position? And that's open to all of you.
Well, I would say for me, the number one thing that has been so helpful is just networking. Every job that I have received, a leadership position, is because somebody knew me. It wasn't a process where I just started out looking for a job. It was where someone asked me. So I think building relationships, is really, really important. I think it's also important to, once you're in a position, for example, when I started at my first for-profit job, is being very intentional about what you want and sharing that, with your boss, and really creating a plan and working with your boss to reach your goals. So asking for opportunities, and being very intentional in building your career. Because I think sometimes if you're waiting for someone to do that for you or to notice you, that can sometimes not happen. But really having the intention of, I want to lead, I have more ability, I have additional interests, and then really working with your supervisor to make that happen is really helpful.
Yes, and I agree with Amy. I was going to say the same thing about network, network, network. One of the things, though, that I would say is, I would tell a person with a disability the same thing that I would tell a person without a disability on how to be, to grow in his or her career, right? You have to do the same things. Network, network, work, network. You have to be seen, because unfortunately in this, in corporate America, at least with my experience, it's more about who you know than anything else. So you have to make sure that people see you doing things, to make sure that they see that, the impact that you're having in the organization, and look for opportunities. I mean, one thing that it really helped me when I was at Coke was always to have my eyes very open for projects that I could do, that I could be involved as a way to learn. But more than to learn was for me to be exposed to other people, that they can see how good I am and to see my potential. In general, though, what I would say is, when you're thinking about your career, try to remove completely your disability as a variable, right? Don't let the disability influence, anything on what you want to be, right? Obviously, I wouldn't, if I want to be a builder, that's not going to work, right? But if you want to be a leader, the fact that you have a disability doesn't, is irrelevant. So focus on developing yourself and don't let your disability instruct you or limit you in your thinking and in your ambitions of what you want to be. And like Amy said, you have to be very intentional on what you want to need. You need to have constant conversations with your supervisors. But also, one thing that I found for me that was very important is to find, like, I don't know if this works in English, but in Spanish we say finding godfathers. Who is your godfather in the organization? Finding a godfather in the organization, somebody that is a higher level, that believes in you, and he can also help you advocate for you when those opportunities come. Because sometimes when you are trying to go up, you have the leaders up here, and then they're discussing things, we want to move this person from here. But if you have a godfather in that group, he will think of you. He will say, well, Vincenzo, it would be perfect for this role. But if you're not seen, he's not going to think about it, and you will lose that opportunity.
Do you think like mentorship, having a
Mentorship, yes.
mentor that's higher up, a godfather or godmother?
Yeah, exactly. God person.
God person. But thank you. Yeah, no, I completely agree. The Career Academy would talk about, when networking, we talk about kind of like gatekeepers, people who know lots of other people. Having them on your side can be really helpful. Um, Brian or Christopher, you have anything that you'd like to add?
I echo all the comments that have been made. I mean, networking is so important, not just within your organization, but in the community and things that you're interested, etc. Finding a strong mentor or people that can help guide you or just talk things out is very important as well. And I think, being a strong communicator, being somebody who is not afraid to speak up, and somebody who stands for what they believe in is very, very important. Strong principles, strong ethics. I think that is something that is respected whether you have a disability or not. But I think sometimes with your disability, you feel like you have to compromise to, just kind of get by or make do or whatever. And I think those are just standards that are really well respected, and lead by all those examples.
Yeah, and I want to follow that, Brian, with just the leading by example. I think ties into something else I wanted to mention, which is how we're often expected to work with less than what we actually need and make excellence from scraps. And I think it's unfair, but we still have to challenge it every day and deal with it. And I think that when you're going for a leadership position, you already have a lot of the qualities that are required to be a leader, because leaders often have to work with suboptimal conditions to make things better either for themselves or for their teams. So I would say you should remain confident. No one's born with perfect leadership skills. Some people just get an early start with learning how to be leaders. So if you want to be a leader, tying back to what Vincenzo said, to find someone who makes you feel like following them or has traits that you admire in them, who's on your side, who's higher up, and work on manifesting the traits of a leader that you want in yourself by observing them and what they do. And that helps you to have a goalpost to reach for. And I think the best leaders are often people who listen, not just people who talk or bark orders. It's best to listen and try to do what works for the whole group, or at least the most people in the group. And we've all seen people who think they're good leaders and managers, but actually aren't. But we're in a unique position with our varied experiences as people with disabilities to better understand what it takes to be a good leader. Because you know when when your needs aren't being met better than most do, since we often have to advocate for ourselves. So try to remember that as you're shaping yourself into the kind of leader that you wish you had on your team. And think about how your mobility disability can actually be a tool for success, not to the inspirational side of things, but more realistically, how has that positioned you uniquely to have a diverse understanding of needs and to be a critical thinker, an improviser, maybe even a friend and a team member? And that's all I would say.
Thank you. Um, you're
Jason, I would
highlighting.
just echo to that. Chris was talking about all the different skills and everything. For those folks that may be earlier in their career looking to be into leadership positions and are thinking, a position may require you to show, managerial experience or dealing with people or different sorts of situations. I think a lot of people with disabilities, need or have assistants that help them in their personal life. And that is one of the things that, in applying for jobs and everything that I wrapped into, conversations and interviews, not to get personal, but, I hire a variety of personal care attendants to help me with my personal needs. And so that is, before when I was younger, earlier in my career, that was interviewing people, hiring them, training them, scheduling, doing payroll, dealing with all the HR issues, sometimes firing people if things need to be. So that's a lot of, skill set that you get as a person with a disability, navigating a successful life and everything that you can really show off as a skill set as you're looking to advance in your career and become a leader.
You beat me to it. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Like being a person with a disability, you develop leadership skills from just existing as a person with a disability sometimes. And don't be afraid to highlight those. We've got, and this, I'll paraphrase this. We've got a really interesting, we have a person with an invisible disability. Um, We've got a manager who, quote, resents the fact that you need accommodations, conveys that they don't believe that your needs are legitimate and judges you critically than others, shoots down your desire to apply for promotions, and articulates to you verbally that they are hoping you would just quit. Going back to HR isn't an option because it's just one person, word against the others. So we've got a bad manager here. The person's asking, do I just quit? What do I do here? And since all of you are in leadership positions and several of you are people managers, what would you suggest this person do? And this is, by the way, this is, like I said, an invisible disability. So there's not immediate and obvious proof of disability.
I hesitate to immediately give my answer because the a deep part of me just wants to say be petty and stay there just to spite them. But I would say do whatever is best for you. If you feel like you can really succeed in this role and people are being referred to you, you're being held up as the example of how to do a great job. You can still use that, even if you can't necessarily use your manager to represent why you should be allowed to take on more responsibility or move into whatever other role you want. You have other people who can vouch for you and say that this person has demonstrated excellence, shown me how to do my job better, things like that, and start to keep those things and collect them and use them as your evidence, even if you don't have that person backing you. And I think that goes a long way as well. So don't discount yourself there. But I'm so sorry you're dealing with that. It's difficult.
My answer might be a little trite, but for me, I feel like life is not a dress rehearsal, and sort of we got one shot. And so, your well-being and your personal, I guess, just happiness is because work is so much of what we do. And so I think, you know, acknowledging that this may not be the space that you're going to be the person that you want to be, that you start doing some of the things that we talked about, like networking, getting involved, you know, maybe in volunteer opportunities or other opportunities to showcase your skills and look for something different. So I think, and maybe I hope someone here maybe has a better answer than that, but I am just getting to the place in my life where I think being healthy, you know, mentally and emotionally is really, really important. And that also allows us to do better work too. So if you're in an environment where you're not appreciated and your skills are not being fully utilized, I would suggest looking for something different. But I'm sure people have other ideas.
Amy, I was going to say similarly. I had a job in college where before starting promised a lot of accommodations, simple, you know, accessible entrances, an automatic door just to get into the office. And I get there the first day and it's not installed. And I even address it and kind of just keep getting, you know, lip service about it. And that job just never really went well over the, you know, 6 to 8 months that I was there. It was a place that I thought, you know, had potential to, you know, be a career, you know, if I did well in that particular time. And, you know, I was 20 or so at the time. And so I really kind of had this feeling, you know, it was different in my disability journey of, you know, man, like, you know, it's not going to work anywhere. And did I do something wrong or something like that? And how could I have made, you know, this a better experience or played that better or anything like that? And I realized in the end, especially, you know, later in my career too, that was just a place that wasn't worth staying around. It wasn't going to change. If I, you know, tried a few of the things that I did to try to get it to work and they didn't, that was their problem, not mine. And that's much easier to say than to actually do. I recognize that for a lot of people, you know, it's your livelihood, but there are places where it's just not worth staying around.
Yeah, and I would even suggest with the examples you gave, it sounds like your company would lose a lot by losing you. So remember that as well. It's not just you that needs them, they need you far more than you need them. Especially if they're treating you like you're undervalued when clearly you've done so much in the role and people have looked to you for examples of what to do. So I think remember that as you're networking, as you're finding other positions that might be more in line with what you want without all the toxicity, and just go toward that and remember that you're a commodity, you're valued as well. You're not just someone who can be thrown away the way that that person thinks, and they're going to miss you when you're gone because you offer so much.
Thank you very much. So this, I want to ask this question because I think this follows up. All right, so we don't know everything in and out of this person's situation. You know, I'm hearing a lot of be an advocate for yourself. If it's not a good fit, if you don't feel like you're going to move forward, don't be afraid to move on to another role. I get asked, as a career advisor, I get asked all the time, how do I know that a company won't discriminate against me when I'm looking for jobs? I think that's probably the number one fear, is this idea that I'm just going to run into barrier after barrier after barrier. So when you're job seeking, or put it this way, what advice would you give to someone who wants to find out if a company is going to be a safe space for them as they're doing a job search?
You know, Jason, my first reaction to that question is that don't worry about that. I mean, just, you know, just apply to the job that you think that you're qualified, and just apply to that because you know that you have the rights that are behind you. You're not going to know if an organization is going to discriminate about, you know, because discrimination is very subtle. And it's not that they publish it. We're going to discriminate against people with disabilities. So, I mean, if you want some confidence, you can see, you know, bigger companies are, you know, tend to be less discriminatory than smaller companies. but also you can see, in their web pages if they have any statements about inclusion, if their websites are intentionally accessible, if they are asking for accommodation questions in their, in your interactions with them. I mean, those kind of things are things that give you hints. But in my opinion, I wouldn't use that to stop me to apply to a company or not, because you don't know. And you don't know the impact that you will have. And you don't know, I mean, who is going to be there. You might, because sometimes discrimination is not that the company will discriminate against you. It might be just your manager that will discriminate against you. And companies have many, many managers. So it's a little bit of luck, which is exactly the same luck that anybody else, it has to run when you go for a job, and you might have a manager that is not a good person, So I wouldn't limit myself for that.
Yeah, I want to also comment on similar things to what you said, Vincenzo. If the company is giving you signs like maybe the person that you interact with isn't the best, but if you won't have to work directly with them in your role, then that's fine. But if you think that you will, and it's clearly a sign ahead of time, and they're discriminatory to the point where you don't even feel like you're going to get the role, then maybe you dodged a bullet. But also, if someone doesn't seem to fully understand, but they're still willing to give you a chance, that shows that they're not a total jerk to the point where they wouldn't even give you that opportunity. So I'd say that that's often your first clue is, are they even willing to take a chance on you and accept that even though you have a disability, you could be perfect for the role? Because a true bigoted or discriminatory person wouldn't even do that. So I know that's not a perfect answer, but it's just something to think about.
Well, and it's not a perfect answer because exactly to Vincenzo's point, you don't know. What's the number one way to find out if they discriminate against people with disabilities? Tell them you're a person with a disability. See what happens. Again, I think that goes back into this constant theme of self-confidence and self-advocacy, and really putting yourself out there. It's 1 o'clock, so we've got about 15 minutes. So for everyone who's still watching, we're open for questions. You can post them in the Q&A. Katie's keeping an eye on the chat. We'd love to answer any of your questions. Let's see, thank you all for your thoughts. Very appreciative. I did develop my disability until I had been with the company for 2 years. She treated me far better before it became an issue. Let's see, I didn't know I was eligible for intermittent disability leave until I'd after used all my PTO because of it, and had gotten written up for not scheduling PTO. So this is I'm 49 and this is all new to me. So yeah, newly acquired disability, navigating all of these rights that I tell companies all the time, we're really bad at communicating with people what their rights are. I think I was disabled for 30 some odd years before I actually understood the ADA. So this was an excellent discussion. I appreciate all the speakers' time. Thank you very much. Good luck with your meeting with your manager. Do you have any additional questions? Well, let's see. We got a lot of thank yous. My disability comes with obesity. I have several hip and shoulder issues and use a walker mobility scooter at work. I use a chair to roll. So we're getting a lot of wonderful thank yous. Well, let's do this. So some of you are meeting each other for the first time. As we've been having this conversation, has there been a comment that you've heard another one of the panels say and you want them to expand on that, or you have a question for somebody else? Or what topics or what additional things do you want to say that we haven't covered yet?
I think two people did just ask
Oh, yeah.
questions in the chat.
How do you handle accommodations for business travel? And how have you approached professional networking when so many places are inaccessible?
I want to handle the professional networking one first because I feel like that's a quicker answer for me. One of those ways is emails or finding other ways to reach out to the companies that are going to those things that you would want to go to, but the buildings aren't accessible and they don't have another entrance. First of all, check to see if they have an entrance you can use. If they don't, then find out. Sometimes they post lists of which companies are coming to those types of workshops and job fairs, so you can reach out to them independently of that event and try to get your resume to the people that you think it would fit most with, or if you can find who's organizing that event and ask if there's a way they can like set up a temporary ramp or anything like that for you to access the building. If that's not possible, maybe they have alternatives for you. You won't know until you ask. I know it's not great, but it's better than just accepting that they might not do anything for you, because maybe they will. They just don't know they need to. Because a lot of people don't think of disability first or even second because it's not as common in their lives or in their workspaces. And then for the, I don't want to take over, but just real quick for the business accommodations one, I just speak directly with my manager and see if there's anything that the company can do, or if I know the person who usually handles that sort of thing, then I'll ask like, what's the typical process for requesting this sort of accommodation, or this sort of maybe you need like an assistant to help you in the airport if you're like getting on a flight, or if you need someone to help you set up, like when you get to the location, someone to help you with a wheelchair or something like that. A lot of times the company will already have something like that in place. If they don't, ask, has anyone used a similar accommodation in the past? Or even people without a disability sometimes need help in business travel. So just ask what sorts of things the company has done in the past, and then would they be open to whatever it is that you think you need. And maybe if you don't know exactly what, then look to what other people have done in the past and what they suggest for business travel accommodations online, and then see if any of that would work for you. A lot of our job as a person with a disability has to be being your own researcher and advocate. So sometimes that's what it boils down to, and it's not fun, but that's what I have for you. I'm sorry.
I'll answer the question about business travel. At least with my job in banking, I was an auditor. And auditing is often a job where, there's a lot of travel. Working for a bank of its own, I applied for the job. I had been networking with the company, so they had come back to me when this new position came open. And there was potential for this job to have travel to other sites, the other side of Missouri. They had some locations in the West Coast as well. But it was just having a candid conversation, having had networked with the company over some time, them getting to know me, that we were able to come to an accommodation where in this role, I wouldn't need to be the one doing the traveling to those various sites. That's probably a little different than the question was answered, but I think just more globally in a position that maybe does have some travel, especially in today's world of remote work. I think there are ways to work around it. If the company really likes you and thinks you're talented and equipped to succeed in the job and do well for the company, they'll find a way to make it work, I think.
We have two questions that I think could be answered simultaneously. One person is asking, do I mention my disability in the application process? And then another person is asking this classic, like if there are 15 job requirements and I have 14 of them and I can't do one because of my disability, do I go ahead and still apply?
So I will start. I'll just be funny. Sometimes I've read a lot of articles and research about even just men and women. Oftentimes, women, more common than men, if they can't do every single or don't have experience doing every single one of the qualifications, they won't apply. Whereas oftentimes men will apply when they have not had the same experience. And so I think that has taught me a lot about looking at the job requirements. And I feel like if you can do the majority of them and you are a good leader and have good skills, that you should apply. Not everyone is going to know every single thing about every job. And so having the opportunity to learn new skills and to think about in the interview process, maybe if you know there's a gap or a hole, maybe you haven't done that specific thing, but that you've done something very similar to that that is transferable. And so I think, again, being very, very strategic in your answers, thinking about very good examples that can showcase your skills and the things that you have done rather than highlighting the things that you haven't done. And then I also think it's, if somebody says, what's your experience doing that? I don't answer, well, I haven't done that. I will say, well, I've had experience doing this, which is very similar. So again, I think just promoting yourself and thinking about the skills and the unique abilities that you do have, because very few people have every single skill required on every single job at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, what I would add to that is that, it depends on what that thing is, the thing that you cannot do, and if that specific thing cannot be accommodated, right? Because, you might say, well, lift 20 pounds. Okay, how often I'm going to be lifting 20 pounds? Is that something that so if it's something that happens once a year, then I'm sure we can find a way, right, to address that. Because often those job posting are template based, and they would have requirements there that are requirements that are not necessarily a strict requirement, right? So I agree with Amy. I would not stop myself to do that. In the interview process, you just ask the question and tell them, go to the objective of that task and think about what other ways you have to achieve the same task. And as it relates to disclosing your disability, I mean, I go back and forth on that. I'm of the person that thinks that if your disability is relevant, yes. But if it's not relevant, no, right? Because especially in the first interviews, they have to know you for who you are, for your experience, for your knowledge, for your background. The disability is not, it doesn't, it doesn't add or subtract anything on that. When you go, advance in the process, when it's time to disclose your disability because of accommodations, then you do it. But disclosing it at the very beginning, I don't really think it's necessary, because you're taking away the focus from who you are and your experience and all that to let them, think about disability. In other words, you first make them fall in love with you. And once they're in love with you, they're not going to care that you have a disability or not. That's going to be totally irrelevant. But if you tell them at the beginning and they have a little bit of concerns and all that, they're not going to open the doors to fall in love with you.
I'll echo that standpoint. Yeah, I think if your job is at Paraquad or United Spinal or Starkloff Disability Institute, and your disability is relevant, yes, mention it. But if you're applying for a job at Google or JP Morgan Chase, there's no reason. Talk about your skills and everything that you can bring to that job. I do find one of the things that has made me successful in my job is when I am finally, I don't even know if they still do in-person interviews. I assume most places do. But if you have an in-person interview and you have a mobility disability, and you don't want to have that shocked, recruiter, meeting you in the lobby expecting an able-bodied person walking around and worrying about how to do a door. When they invite you for the in-person interview, ask, oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited to meet you. Could you tell me where is the accessible parking? Or is there an automatic door? Who can I contact to do that? Which will just give them a little bit of a heads up that, oh, this situation is a little different, but they're handling their issues, or not even their issues. They're handling their circumstances. And they know how to problem solve. And so I think it's just being proactive and dropping little breadcrumbs like that is helpful.
Yeah, I personally don't use the word disclosure. Learning when to tell them you're disabled. We have a whole process. We have a flow chart that we'll go through with you. Reach out to Starkloff Disability Institute. We work virtually with anybody. So if you have some questions about how you go about doing that, feel free to reach out to us. I know that United Spinal also has a program, and I'm sure that their process is very similar to ours. So, if you want to reach out to United Spinal, look them up. They also provide, Vincenzo, are you also nationwide for that program, or is it?
Yeah, it's nationwide. We're a national nonprofit. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a lot of options out there, a lot of people that have lived this and kind of know how to navigate it. Thank you everyone for your questions. I apologize that we weren't able to get to all of them. I saw some really kind of harrowing stories, which people with disabilities, I think we all have. As I tell employers when I work with them, I don't know a person with a disability that doesn't have an experience of discrimination of some kind. That's just the reality of being disabled in the world that we live in right now. But that's why community and coming together like we did today with our 3 organizations is so crucial. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Vincenzo and United Spinal. Thank you, Amy and Paraquad. Thank you, Brian and Christopher, for giving us your time. I'm very excited to continue to move this relationship forward and help even more people get jobs. And thank you everyone who attended today. Like I said, give us about a week to get the recording up on YouTube, but we'll email everyone once it's up there so that you have it. And if you have any additional questions or want to know more about services, look us up on our various websites and feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.